Aloha. Welcome to Abe Lee Seminars sessions. We're going to continue with the appraisal process. And in the appraisal process, we as licensees and as consumers need to know certain things. So we're going to talk about certain words and their meaning and how it applies to you as a consumer if you're buying or selling and as a real estate agent. Fair market value. We hear that all the time. Well, what's a fair market value? It says value can be described as the worth of a thing in money or goods at a certain time. And the value that we're looking at in real estate is looked for by brokers and appraisers for the fair market value or the probable sales price of the property if it were offered in the open market. And the market value is defined further as the highest price a ready, willing, and able buyer, not forced to buy, is willing to pay. And what a ready and willing seller, not forced to sell, is willing to sell it for. And when you have a meeting of the minds between what the buyer is willing to pay and what the seller is willing to sell for, and they agreed on that price, that's determined to be the fair market value. And by the property should be in the market for at least a few weeks or a month so that people have seen the property and they have had proper exposure. So that's what they determine to be the fair market value. So now let's look at the other types of values. So we talked about fair market value. And the second one is what we call the assessed value. The assessed value is what the tax assessor thinks the property is worth for collecting the taxes. Right? So if the assessor thinks the land value is $1 million and the house is $1 million, then the value of that property is $2 million. And based on that $2 million, at least on Oahu, is $3.50 per thousand for single family homes or condominiums where the owner is an owner occupant and not an owner investor. And that's how they assess values. And then they have different rates depending on what type of property it is. So if you have business, you have agricultural, you have apartment, you have residential, they all have different tax rates. And that's what the assessors have to do, is to determine the assessed value of a property. And by the way, they do this for all the properties on the whole island, which is, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of properties that they have. And they got to be fair in assessing the tax assessed value. Pretty tough. The next one is called book value. And so for some of you that have taken accounting in the past, the book value is what they keep on the books for accounting purposes for the company's records. So let's say somebody bought a piece of property 50 years ago, and they bought it for $50,000. $25,000 was attributable to the building value, and $25,000 was attributable to the land value. So 25 to the building, 25 for the land, and so it's worth $50,000 on the books. Now, 50 years later, is that property worth $50,000? No, it's gone up how many times? But in the accounting world, the book value is still $50,000 minus accumulated depreciation. So book value is for accounting purposes, but it doesn't give you the true value of that property because the value of the property could have gone up to $1 million, but they bought it for $50,000. Well, book value is $50,000. Now, I've been told that accountants can have a different set of books and do what they call fair market value assessments. So they can give a true indication of the fair market value of the property that the company owns. And so I'm not an accountant, but I believe the original book value is what they paid originally, and then they may have a different way of doing fair market value for the books. The next one is called mortgage loan value. How much is this property worth to the lender? So let's say you buy a piece of property for $800,000. So the buyer made an offer for $800,000. And the lender says, okay, we'll loan you the money, but it's subject to appraisal. If the appraisal comes in at $800,000, then you're fine because appraisal matches the purchase price. But what if the appraised value comes out to $750,000 and you overpaid by $50,000 according to the appraiser? the bank is not going to loan you $800,000. They're going to loan it to you on $750,000 minus the down payment, and then they'll loan you the amount based on $750,000, not an $800,000 purchase price. So now the seller says, "Hey, I want my $800,000. I'm not selling for any less," and the buyer really wants that property. Well, you have several options. One, the buyer can make up the difference and pay the $50,000 extra in cash, and that's not mortgageable. Or the seller could say, "Well, I'll come down in my price a little bit. Maybe I'll come down to $775,000, but you got to come up with the other $25,000." So there's some adjustments being made if the appraisal doesn't come in. So that's the challenge with mortgages. So as realtors, we're sweating it, saying, okay, the price for the property in contract is at $800,000, and we better hope that that appraisal comes in at $800,000. Because if it doesn't and comes in lower, then you have to make some adjustments. But if it comes up higher and it comes out $850,000, they're going to loan only on $800,000, the purchase price, not on the $850,000, and you can't scoop up extra money. Okay, so that's where the mortgage loan value comes in. So the bank has to look at an appraisal and make sure that they're giving the money that's a fair market value for the appraisal. All right, so it becomes a little nerve-wracking if you're not sure whether the appraisal will come in at that price or not. And then the last section is called insurance value. Now, if you have a house and a lot, and you buy insurance policy for fire, the insurance company will not cover for land value loss. Because the way they look at it is land is indestructible and it does not go down in value. But if that house burns down, then we'll give you the replacement value for the house that got burnt, but not the land value. So they're going to separate out the value of the building to the land value and only cover for the building. What if you really glitz it up and put some super expensive material into a house and the insurance company says, "Hey, this is too much. You overpaid on all these, imported gold toilet seats or whatever." And they say, "We're not giving you insurance coverage on that toilet. We're going to give it to you for an average toilet, not the gold-plated toilet." Okay, so I don't know how you're going to convince the insurance company to cover for the loss if there's a fire or there's an earthquake or there's a hurricane and destroys the house. Okay, so the insurance value is usually what they call a reasonable price to replace the house that was insured, but not to the super duper materials that you used, and they should give you what they call a reasonable value to cover so that you can build your house back up. So these are the different types of values that we see in real estate. So we're looking at fair market value. We're looking at assessed value for tax purposes. We're looking at book value for accounting purposes, mortgage value for loan purposes, and insurance value for insurance. Isn't that amazing that they have all these different values that different groups have to look at? So hopefully you understand a little more about how they assess the different types of values. Aloha.